All right, so considering for a good little while now, a lot of people they kind of consider me like the go-to guy for boxing expertise on the lighter weight classes in boxing, especially. I'm gonna start talking about where I personally rank fighters at the lower weight classes within their weight classes, in particular, so that people are a little bit more aware, I guess, of who ranks where and who might be a true top tier opponent for another fighter, or not. I think with super flyweight now, especially, it's a little bit easier because I think people are a little bit more familiar with the names. I mean, thanks to this card that just happened, but also thanks to some other things coming across where. Rau'shee Warren moved down into the weight class. He was a former bantamweight champion. Kal Yafai's emergence, for the UK market, that's definitely a big boon to the division as a whole. Even Jerwin Ancajas' good knockout victory on the undercard of Pacquiao Horn, I think, it helps out a little bit. People are a little bit more familiar with some of these names now than they otherwise were a year ago, even half a year ago, a few months ago, really. So without further ado, I'll just start listing off the names of the guys that I think are the top fighters and where I think that they should be ranked. Number one, I have to rank Srisaket Rungvisai number one. It's just he knocked out the man. He knocked out the Roman Gonzalez. Pound for pound number one, or at the very least, pound for pound top guy. He won the first fight controversially. I didn't think that he won the first fight, but he won the second fight, and he really brought it to him. He really brought it to Gonzalez before Gonzalez could really get a rhythm and a tempo together. Gonzalez looked like he might start being able to work some of the old magic again, but Srisaket managed to kind of snuff that out before things started getting a little bit more dicey for him. So got to rank Srisaket number one. Number two, very, very, very difficult. Because, I mean, shit, 2 through 4 is extremely hard because the gap between 1 and 4 is tiny. It's minuscule. It's really, really minuscule. And I wouldn't blame anybody for having a completely different top 4 from me because of, I think that the skill and even the achievement gaps between these guys are so small. Number 2, I gotta put Juan Estrada there. I gotta put him just slightly above. Now he was gonna come in at 3, simply because Estrada, he just pulled off the big win over Carlos Cuadras, and he did it in a fashion that, unlike both Srisaket and Roman Gonzalez, I mean, he did it in a fashion where I don't want to say that he made it look easy, but he kind of made it look easy, at least once he got into his own tempo, his own rhythm, and to the mid and the late rounds of that fight. And so the thing is, Cuadras is a top-tier fighter. He's really a top-tier talent. He does certain things in that ring that very few fighters can do. You can name off only, like, probably on one hand, the number of fighters that are top, like elite championship level fighters that can kind of pull off some of the improvisations and the tricks that he does. There's a lot of guys that they might be able to try to do it against much lower level opposition, but just the way that he kind of switches stances, throws punches at different angles, the hand speed, the agility, the way that he kind of creates and innovates in there is something special. For Estrada to have been able to kind of time that out and kept Cuadras from kind of busting him up the way that Cuadras did to Chocolatito and the way that he even did to Srisaket, and had Srisaket really playing catch up towards the end of that fight, with where the head clash happened and the cut opened up and Cuadras was clearly ahead on the cards. Estrada was pretty much right in there and giving him the business the entire way, or at the very least most of the way. Once he kind of got out some of the shakes and the jitters and maybe some of the ring rest that had existed at least in the early rounds for Estrada, and also the fact that Cuadras is a very fast starter as well. It's difficult to be able to try and get your bearings about you when you have a guy that's just throwing like a whirlwind at you. Number 3, of course, now Inoue. I already mentioned him. Inoue, I mean, he used to be the number 1. It's only because of the fact that this division became a lot more crowded that he ever kind of got taken from that perch. Not knocked off that perch, but I guess displaced from that perch simply because of the fact that in spite of the huge explosive victory over Omar Narvaez, who at that time was the man of the division, of the super flyweight division. He wasn't necessarily the lineal champ per se, but he was clearly the best fighter, the most notable guy, the guy with the most amount of defenses, and so on and so forth. He was basically undefeated at the weight. The only previous loss was to Nonito Donaire, competitive fight. give Donaire a lot of problems. Inoue went in there, wiped him out, and clearly made himself the man at the time. More recently, he's basically just been kind of knocking off his #1 contenders. He's been trying to clear out mandatory so that he could get these other big fights against the likes of Chocolatito and now against Srisaket, Cuadras, Estrada, maybe Ancajas, Yafai, etc. Maybe Juan, maybe Casimero. A couple of names that are coming very soon on this list. So Inoue's at number 3. Number 4, Carlos Cuadras. And like I said before, you could rank Cuadras higher, really. I mean, depending on your perspective on things. I mean, there is a case to be made that Cuadras beat Chocolatito, that he beat Estrada, and he definitely did beat Srisaket. So he could very well be number 1 for some people, just all things considered. But I did think that Estrada beat him. I thought that him versus Chocolatito was pretty much a draw. But if anybody deserved to win that fight, it might have been Cuadras. But I rank him at number 4. Basically, it's more so what have you done lately? And Inoue is still plugging away, destroying guys that now aren't necessarily at the very, very peak of the top tier of these guys, but just below, like the guys that are just outside of the top 10. Inoue has been fighting those type of guys, those level of guys, and been systematically destroying them and dismantling them the way that he just did to Nieves. So I give him the slight edge over Cuadras. Number 5 is the IBF champion, Jerwin Ancajas. He's a bit more of a recent addition. His biggest win, I mean, according to some people, might be the win over Major Arroyo. Which is the win that actually got him this belt. It was a vacant title, formerly held by Zlani Tete. Tete wound up moving up, couldn't make the weight anymore, vacated the title. He defeated him and Arroyo were the top 2 contenders for the belt. Defeated Arroyo in a pretty impressive fashion. Made his first defense in Macau. Made a second defense on the Pacquiao Horn undercard against Teru Kinoshita, in basically an uncompetitive fight all the way around. Ancajas kind of ranged Kinoshita out. He's got a bit of pop on him. It's kind of funny because he's promoted by MP Promotions, Manny Pacquiao's promotional group, and he fights not unlike a bit of a Manny Pacquiao, although a bit more of a rangy Pacquiao. He's definitely trying to load up on that left hand, left cross. He has a very good right jab though, a very good right hook. He's a dangerous fighter. Especially if you can't get on the inside of him. I think on the inside might be where he's somewhat lax in certain technical skills, but otherwise he's hell in a handbasket for anybody that's going to be in there with him. I think he's he's kind of the dark horse of this division. He might be the guy that nobody sees coming and might be able to potentially upend any of the guys that I already named that are ranked above him. And they do deserve to be ranked above him. I mean, Major Arroyo, Jose Alfredo Rodriguez, which was his first defense, and then Teru Kinoshita. I mean, good opponents, but not necessarily the higher level guys that some of these other fighters have fought. I mean, even Inoue, where he was fighting the likes of David Carmona, who's a very good fighter. The guy that he was pretty much a top 10er recently. He moves just outside of my top 10 more recently because things change and shifts in tide and new fighters kind of emerging and getting big wins, things of that nature. After Janrio Casimero, or excuse me, after Jerwin Ancajas, number 6, I have Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. I still have him this high because I do still think that against most opponents, he can still beat them. I do think that he was starting to maybe work some things out there against Srisaket. And the thing is, I think it was just a culmination of, Gonzalez not necessarily being in the best shape, maybe being a little bit ring weary, war weary, and being in there against just an absolute brutal savage in Srisaket that, he wound up getting knocked out by him. But until I see Gonzalez really looking really bad, again, I can't necessarily completely displace him outside of, like say the top 10. So I put him at number 6, largely based off of more so past accomplishments and even recent accomplishments. Even in the Cuadras and the first Wisaksit fight, he did very well. Once he started kind of getting into a rhythm after a couple of rounds, I think now maybe it's just that he's starting slower. Sometimes that'll come with age as well too. The ability to kind of get warm and get into a fight can be troublesome for you. Number 7, Kal Yafai, the WBA champion. Yafai actually, his first fight against, or his first championship fight rather, against Luis Concepcion, he did really well. I was actually pretty impressed with the way he was able to kind of manhandle Concepcion and beat him pretty handily. I mean, he beat him you know, by a fairly wide, clear decision. And you know, there really wasn't very much controversy at all about it, I guess, unless you want to say that Yafai clinched too much, which I mean he kind of does. But more recently, in his first defense of that title against Suguru Muranaka, Muranaka wasn't really like a high level prospect or contender out of Japan. He was a good Japanese fighter, but not necessarily like one of these guys that people are saying, like, you know, out of Japan, saying like, oh, like this is a guy to watch out for. Like this guy might be able to do some big things in the future. That wasn't what Muranaka was. He wasn't on that kind of Inoue, Tanaka kind of tip going down. But Yafai had a lot of trouble with him. He had a lot of trouble with him. And Yafai actually has a pretty difficult opponent coming up, I think. Sho Ishida. If he beats Sho Ishida, I think that's a very good win for him. Ishida's undefeated, 24-0. Ishida's a very tall fighter. And a guy with a fair amount of pop himself. Ishida actually knocked out Komgrid. Well, he knocked out Komgrid, not the pitch, but he also knocked out what's his name? Karun Harupinler. Or he didn't knock out, not the pitch, he knocked out Harupinler. That's the guy that, fighter from Thailand, can't think of his fighting name. Pechbarmbon Kokijim. That Inoue, I think, went, what was it, about 7 or 8 rounds with before he knocked him out, and Ishida managed to smoke him in 2. I mean, although that was a few years ago, so I'm sure Koki Jim has probably improved since then, and so he was given Inoue a tougher fight than might have been expected because of that. But she's a pretty big guy, you know. Ishida's 5'8" and change, tall, rangy, good pop, good opponent for Yafai, and he might be able to rise up in the rankings if Ishida shows that he's a really good fighter in the ring there with Yafai, and if Yafai is able to kind of basically have the answers for the questions that Ishida is going to ask of him. Number 8, Rau'shee Warren, the former WBA Bantamweight champion. And he's actually, like, even in my opinion, I think he's a little bit, like, I think it might be surprising that he's only at number 8, that he might not be a little bit higher. I mean, it really kind of depends on your perspective. Some people really aren't very impressed with Rau'shee Warren, or weren't to begin with. To me, I always felt like he was fighting a little bit too high in weight when he was fighting at bantamweight. You know, he's a guy that pretty much his entire amateur career, and it pretty much was an amateur career, truly. You know, he fought in 3 different Olympics. Unfortunately, wasn't able to medal. But, you know, he was fighting mostly at the flyweight division, which in the amateurs used to be about 113 pounds and change, and now it's 114 pounds and change. So to me, like, if you're making 113 or 114 on the same day, just a few hours before you're actually fighting, even though it's only 3 rounds, for 10 or 12 round fights, you should be able to make 112. You know, if not 108, but at least 112 or at least 115 with a 24-hour weigh, and you'd be able to, you know, rehydrate and gain back the even just a few pounds that you might have had to lose last minute. But, you know, he still showed out, and he did a pretty damn good job for what it was at bantamweight. You know, 2 tough fights against Juan Carlos Payano, and Payano is now a super bantamweight ostensibly. You know, he's actually campaigning at 122 now. And then Zakianov, and Zakianov actually has a big fight, big unification coming up with Brian Burnett, and a fight that I don't think is going to be easy for either of them. So, you know, Rau'shee Warren, he just kind of came across a couple of tough fighters at a division that wasn't necessarily suited to him, and hopefully Chocolatito kind of takes note of that, the way that Warren did, and maybe moves down to flyweight, because I do think that he still beats virtually all the flyweights. Warren may be able to really do some things at super flyweight. You know, I think that he looked a lot better against McJoe Arroyo. His gas tank looked a lot better. He's had some stamina issues in the past that I don't think were present against Arroyo. I think making 118 was so easy for him. He kind of slacked off in training. Making 115 is just difficult enough that he definitely has to put in that extra work in order to make the weight and be in that tip-top condition, that tip-top shape. Number 9, Junior Casimero, former 108 champ. Former 112 champ, recently knocked out I'm Not Runwong, what was a big victory in their rematch. He's a road warrior, knocked out Luis Lazarte in Argentina, Runwong in Macau. He's a great fighter. He might be, I believe he's supposed to be the mandatory for Jerwin Ancajas coming up. That's a great fight. And then number 10 is Aston Palicte, who's a bit more of a prospect contender as opposed to like a former champion or former contender that's been around. Good fighter, high-level fighter. Recently beat Oscar Cantu in a bit of an upset. But that's my top 10, man. So catch you guys in the next one. Peace.